Hey everybody, Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek here. So let's just say you're somebody, a technical professional, maybe you're an engineer, maybe you're a scientist, and you want to get better at giving presentations in front of others, but you want a low pressure way to do it. What's that way? Well, let me reveal it to you. I think it is appearing on podcasts. You might think appearing on podcasts, well, how's that going to help me? Well, hear me out. Podcasts are a very low pressure way to practice giving to practice public speaking, not giving presentations, to practice public speaking, because you're basically having a conversation with the podcast host, and they're going to be asking you questions that you likely have the answers to because they're going to be asking you questions about yourself. This isn't an instance where you're presenting perhaps you're presenting data that you didn't generate, or you're working on a project that you didn't originate. This is something where you're talking about you. And if you can't talk about you, I don't really know what to say. Well, I don't really know what to say. But you should be able to talk about you really well. So when it comes to actually being a guest on podcasts, well, what do you have to do? Well, firstly, you have to figure out what topic do you want to speak about. And once you do that, the next step is to reach out to podcast hosts. One way that's really helpful in doing that is going to listennotes.com. That's listennotes.com, and going through and just doing a search on the various podcasts that would be interested in hearing what you want to talk about. I talk a lot about giving better technical presentations. So I look for podcasts that would be open to hearing that message. In fact, most of the podcasts I've ever been on, it's from me looking through lists of potential podcasts and reaching out to the podcast hosts. Typically, once you find those type of podcasts, if you go to their websites, they'll have perhaps they may even have a be a guest form on the podcast on the website. If not, they'll have some sort of contact information. Maybe you reach out to them through social media. Maybe they have an email. Whichever way, you reach out to the podcast host. And then you basically have to pitch them on the idea. I firmly believe in actually listening to at least a part of a podcast episode before you reach out to them. So when you reach out to them, you can actually say that you listened to an episode. And as a podcast host myself, that's actually rather appealing to me, because this is not just somebody who's just coming out of the blue, just wanting to be a guest on my podcast. They at least have shown some interest in my podcast. So you want to do that. Listen to a podcast episode, and also go through the listing of the podcasts that this person has already done, the episodes, to see if your topic has already been covered. Because if not, then maybe you don't reach out to them. But if it hasn't, and if you think that their audience might be interested in that topic, then you reach out to them. So essentially, you say that you listen to a podcast, and then you tell them what you took away from that podcast episode, what you actually listened to, and then you get into the meat of it and on what you talk about, and then you ask at the end of it, would this topic be of interest to your audience? And if so, you'd be glad to be a guest on their podcast. And then you send the pitch. And if you don't hear back within a week, I suggest following up just to make sure that they received it, and then offer another reason as to why this podcast episode with your topic might be of interest to their listenership, to the podcast host's listenership. And if you don't hear back again, maybe you follow up one more time in a week's time. And if you don't hear back after that, then leave it at that. Maybe try again, maybe in a few months. But if you do hear back from them and they're interested in having you on the podcast, well, now great. What do you do to get prepared? Well, you get your story straight. all the type of tips or advice, recommendations that you want to impart on the podcast, make sure you have those in your mind. Make sure you have stories ready. Stories are really important when it comes to just communicating with others. I don't know, when you were a child, maybe you liked hearing stories from your parents, before you went to bed. But it's not as if that like or that want went away once you became an adult. Adults still like stories. We just, for some reason, seem to move away from them, especially the technical types. At least I know I did. So they basically have stories ready to go when it comes time for the interview. So now it comes time for the interview. Make sure everything is in check. If you have a microphone, make sure it's working. If you have headphones, I highly suggest using headphones since the audio is better. if it's going to be a video component, make sure you find that out before the day. So you make sure that your background isn't cluttered or just in disarray. I use my own background. I use my own background anyway, even if it's not video. It's just something I do just in case, just in case they decide later on, actually, I want to use this as video. So they certainly can. So you make sure all of that is ready, and you show up a few minutes before the actual interview. You want to respect the host's time. And if you have any questions beforehand, you want to ask them before the host hits record. And then once the recording starts, then it's time to have fun. They ask you questions, you answer them, you have some stories ready. It's time to actually have a conversation with the podcast host. So then the podcast ends, and now what? Well, I'm a firm believer in that you should promote the actual podcast episode. You want others to hear what you had to say during that podcast interview, and it's actually helpful to the host too, since he or she really wants to push the episode or just push their podcast out as much as possible. They want as many people to listen to it or watch it if it's video as possible. So you doing that is good for them. Always make sure that you ask. If they don't offer, you ask them, please let me know when the episode is ready, and I will promote it. And then not only that, once that's even done, keep a connection with the podcast host. I certainly try to do that with any podcast that I've been on, because you never know. Maybe this could be a person that ends up as a part of your own network. Maybe this person can help you get your next job. Maybe you can help this person get their next job. It's just so helpful to have as many people, useful people, resourceful people in your network as possible. I know, especially around this time, so many people are losing their jobs based on layoffs. And the ones who don't have networks are certainly struggling, whereas the ones that do have networks, not struggling as much. So always keep that in mind. So that's essentially it. If you want to get better at giving presentations or just public speaking in general, I highly suggest being a guest on podcasts. Figure out what you want to say first. Look through listennotes.com to find the podcast that would be amenable to hearing your message. Reach out to that person. Reach out to those podcast hosts. And make sure all of your mic and your audio, your video is working correctly. Show up on time, or show up a little early. Go through the actual episode, the actual podcast. Make sure you have stories ready. Make sure you have all your information ready. One other thing is, make sure that if people want to get in touch with you, you know what you want to say then. Do you want them to reach out to you on LinkedIn? Is it an email address? Is there a website? Just make sure you have that straightened away. And then afterwards, make sure that you share the episode once it's available. So make sure you ask the podcast host to let you know when the episode goes live so you can share it. And then keep in touch with the host, because you never know how that person could be of use to you, or how you could be of use to that person, and vice versa. That's essentially it. Thanks for listening. And of course, please like and subscribe to the channel. Every little bit helps. I'm Neil Thompson, founder of Teach the Geek. Until next time, take care and stay safe.